Hello, Carl. Hello from England.
Hello, David.
Can you hear us okay?
Hi, we can, Rory. Hi, we can. Hi, Rory. Morning. From sweaty England.
Yes.
They're all worried they got no
I
air
live in,
conditioning.
I live in Dubai and I came to the UK to get away from the heat.
Can I just say, it's amazing that you've all come out on a Friday night, 'cause I know how much people don't come out on Friday nights. And in Sydney, it's quite amazing to have a room full here. And many of you have been lifelong Meat Magic supporters since we've been around, which for me is kind of remarkable. And I can't just thank you all enough, but it's all the team at the back end that have helped us put this together is, I just want to thank the small team that we have, because it is a very, very tiny team that Meat Magic is. But we've managed to pull this together from the flowers to the designs, to the drinks, to the food. And thank you very much for our supporters, for Red Hat for buying the drinks and the food. So I just want to say thank you to Clarence for helping that. And it's a very important conversation with the Red Hat team. But we'll talk about that later. So this little get-together is really about something that I landed across about a year or so with Matthew. So I've known Matthew for 20-odd years. Matthew trained my daughter in swimming, mind coach stuff. So it was that, she was 12 and she's 23 now. That's how long we've known each other, which is, we reconnected a couple of years ago. And Matthew's one of the heads of the business school at UNSW. And he's come up with this thing that is all around AI and human intelligence. And the human intelligence piece, as you'll hear in a minute, is the most important part of any AI adoption at the moment. It's the most topical conversation on the market. And I could think of no one better to have a conversation with than Rory Sutherland, who's the vice chairman of Ogilvy and our chief evangelist. So in the room, you've got both academics and behavioral science masters. If you don't know Rory, I'll be very surprised. He's arguably the most famous advertising man on the planet. And we're very, very blessed to have him on our team to support us. And so I just want to say a massive thank you to Rory for giving us your time, and for David, who's actually over from Dubai. David's in London at the moment. Like he said, he's tried to escape the 35-degree heat in Dubai, but unfortunately he's got 35-degree heat in London and there's no air conditioning. So, they're all struggling a little bit. But I want to just very quickly hand over, because this is not about Meat Magic. This is about, you've come here to see David and Rory and Matthew, and I just want to hand over to David now to moderate this, and I will shut up. But thank you all very much for coming and for giving us your Friday night. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Carl. And unlike the other two learned gentlemen, I'm not an academic. I've worked with PwC and KPMG for 30-odd years, and then spent the last 7 years at Oracle, selling software as a service and artificial intelligence. So I've been on the business side of things, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with people who are far more intelligent than me. So I'll just hand over to Rory for a quick intro online, and then Matthew afterwards in the room. So Rory, just a quick intro.
So I'm not really a behavioral scientist with any kind of credentials whatsoever. I've just spent about 38 years in direct marketing, advertising, and then founded a behavioral science practice within Ogilvy 15 years ago. And I've always regarded consumer capitalism and marketing in general as kind of the Galapagos Islands for understanding human behavior. That in other words, the correct way to understand business, commerce, and an economy, I think, is Darwinist, not Newtonian. In other words, go and observe what's really peculiar and then try and work out what's going on, rather than develop a theory in advance and force fit things into it. So that pretty much captures my attitude to what's going on. What I then see is that psychological factors, in particular trust, which I think is at the bedrock of almost all human value exchange, because it's not quantifiable, has been consequently massively devalued.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Rory. And Matthew, over to you.
Yes, my name is Matthew Byrne. I have a deep interest in leadership and strategy in business. I've been working in business most of my life. I've also am working for the Australian Graduate School of Management, which is a business school that is attached to University of New South Wales. And I started some research a year ago, thinking about what would make a successful AI integration, as the new messages were coming out that AI integrations weren't going that well. And I interviewed 20 CEOs who were about to do an integration, and they told me what keeps them up at night. And what kept them up at night wasn't the tech, it was their human capital. And so I then went out and created a model and did a research on 600 or 550, it's now 600 case studies over the last 4 years of AI integration, and actually found that the AI is not the problem, that HI is the problem, or the human intelligence side of it. And if we don't get that right, then we will end up in what we'd call a substandard AI integration. And we will actually not realize the potential of what the AI has promised us in the advance. And that research now has been published. Went out, the final report went out today on LinkedIn for everyone to have a look at. And it's now sort of starting to find its way into organizations, and organizations are starting to think about how do we do things differently and how can we maximize our returns. So that's about me.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you very much. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation, and I'll kick things off with a question.
Oh. Air conditioning took the router out.
Yes.
Firstly,
You're back, I think. Oh, no sound.
So, David, we lost you there. Can you repeat the question for us, please?
You believe that small smart TV are more than the big $1 million transformation? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? That's amazing. Technology fails us at the final moment.
I can hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I back on again?
Yep. Yes.
Yes, you're back on. I can take that question. It's the idea that, by the way, this is only part of the solution. But just as it's sometimes said that management is a series of symbolic acts, I think that one of the things that we misunderstand in human psychology is that it's both for good and ill, it's subject to significant butterfly effects, that very small symbolic gestures can achieve remarkable results by effectively changing the entire frame or climate within which judgment takes place or transactions occur. And so one of the problems I notice in business is that symbolic acts generally play very well with, for example, the consumer or indeed the employee. They don't play very well with the finance function because they tend to look superfluous. And so one of the things is that we largely generate meaning through what we do that we don't have to do. And I have an argument which is in communication, in behavior, optimize for surprise, because the things that people weren't expecting carry a lot more emotional freight than the things that were previously negotiated and expected. And I'll tell a very quick story about this, which is quite funny. During COVID, I was invited onto a Zoom call. And when I arrived on this Zoom call, I was about the only person on the Zoom call who didn't have a Nobel Prize in economics, because some former student at the University of Chicago was now running a farmer's market in Austin, Texas. And he wanted to ask expert economists what you do with the last vegetable in the tray. Because people tend to look at the last cucumber or the last zucchini or whatever it may be, and they think that's the one that none of the other customers want, so it becomes devalued. And two of the economists said, drop the price, which is the standard economic answer. And I said, don't drop the price, because if there's anything I know about farmers' markets, they're nothing to do with price. You pay a premium for buying direct from the manufacturer. They're street theatre with retail attached. It's not really about the price. And my suggestion was, once there's only one pumpkin left in the tray, hide it in your van, wait for one of your best customers to come along, reveal it and say, I've been saving this for you, and give it to them. And my argument is that an investment in a relationship is more valuable in the longer term than one incremental sale of a discounted pumpkin. Now, I can't say who was right or wrong, except for the glorious fact that Daniel Kahneman agreed with me. But those things, I always argue there are two kinds of capitalism. There's transactional capitalism and there's relational capitalism. And that the most great businesses start effectively with a relational idea, with a psychological idea, sometimes just on the basis of a tiny psychological insight that everybody else has overlooked. What tends to happen as they become larger is the need for the appearance of neatness and quantification forces them to become more and more transactional. And the end state of that is what I call Soviet-style capitalism, where it's notionally capitalism, but it's more interested in actually meeting performance targets than it is in generating lasting, enduring value.
Look, Rory.
Matthew, I was going to ask you actually. Do our audience need to pick one of these, or can they do both?
Look. I think when you think about what Rory just said about that most organizations start off with a relational principle, and then in order to become efficient, they become transactional. We have spent the last 200 years in large organizations developing and training our people to become masters at transactional working. And that is also how we generate trust. We generate trust through the transactions we have with the people, and if they become trustworthy or not. And so we might look at your dependability, and are you a person that comes to work and is dependable? I can depend on you to get the job done. And if you do that well, I build trust in you. I may also think about your judgment. Can I trust you to make a good decision? And so you make 10 good decisions. And so now I trust your decision making. And so in organizations for many years, we've built trust through that transactional trust way of doing it. But the reality is, and I think this is not news to anyone online or here in the audience, is that this AI transformation is going to be over in 18 months. And the way we're at the rate of adoption and the rate of acceleration that we're going on now, we may not have 18 months to build trust in organizations in order to be able to get the best possible outcomes of our AI integration. And so we now need to think about how else can we build trust. And one of the things that if you look into trust teaches us there's an other side of trust. The other side of trust that we tend to use really well when we are in our relationships, and that's what we call relationship trust. And the key ingredient of relationship trust is what we call intimacy, or as I try to rename it, is into-me-see, right? And to allow you just a moment to see the real me, and build a connection through that with, and encourage you for me to see the real you, and for us to build a connection. And we then find points of mutuality quite quickly, and we find a deeper understanding in these little threads of mutuality that start flowing between us. Then the slide becomes string. But if we tug on that, the string will break. If we keep going with that, it becomes rope, and that rope becomes really, really, really strong. And we can tug on that, and the trust doesn't erode. And we can have disagreements, and we can have difficult conversations with each other without going into judgment, and still recover after that. And Rory, what you were talking about is that organizations at the beginning are really, really good at building that kind of relational trust, because they tend to be intimate with each other, and they tend to be intimate with their customers. And the customers have gone on a journey with them, like here with Meet Magic, right? There's an intimacy that exists between the Meet Magic members and the Meet Magic team that have come together. And then eventually what happens is, you get bought, LinkedIn buys you out for $25 billion and creates a big platform over the top of it, and then it becomes transactional. And now they want to get the efficiency by putting AI over the top of it. And now the trust is no longer there. The big issue we have, what CEOs are seeing now, is that we don't have enough trust in our systems in order to be able to implement AI and have an honest conversation with our people saying, I want your job to be here at the end of it, but I just don't know at this stage if it will be. But what I can tell you right now is that I will do everything I possibly can in order to help reinvent yourself so that you can generate value and be a valuable contributor to this organization because you matter. You matter to me, you matter to this organization. And those are like what I would call the symbolic acts that we need right now in order to be able to re-engage our people on this difficult journey that is ahead of us.
It's fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much. So actually that brings me to another question. Are we living in a trust recession? And is AI accelerating a trust recession? Rory.
I'll answer that in two ways. There is a massive problem in that for about 150 years, it was implicitly understood. It was a kind of unwritten, unspoken, but mutually understood assumption that if your employer did well financially, you do okay. I'm not saying that the interests were perfectly aligned or that the rewards would be distributed proportionately. But there was a basic assumption that if your company did well, you were all in the same boat, and consequently, if your company did well, at the very least, you probably wouldn't lose your job.
Okay. Yes, there's a social contract.
There was an implicit social contract which was just understood, and I think the early adoption of technology, robotics, etc., in manufacturing, or indeed offshoring, challenged that fundamental assumption. You know, the whole business of outsourcing and globalization challenged that assumption in terms of manufacturing work. And now we have effectively AI challenging that assumption completely in terms of what you might call the knowledge economy. And so you have a bunch of people working for you who are no longer confident that their interests are in any way aligned with the interests of their employer. And in many cases, the messages the employer is sending to the media by dint of speaking to their investor community is one that says, you know, we have fantastic potential effectively to get rid of a lot of people. I also worry about this because in publicly held companies, which are much more transactional than family companies or founder-led companies, the general way in which AI will be adopted for purposes of convenience, but also to spin a narrative to the city, as it were, is one of cost saving. I think in family-owned companies, I think in founder-led companies, in certain companies, the idea is perhaps we can do more with the same, which is broadly speaking an optimistic message for the employees. I think when AI companies, when the bill comes due to AI companies and they need to make money fast, the most convenient sale to any of their corporate customers will be one of cost saving, not one of opportunity exploration. And so, I'm not necessarily threatened by AI. I'm threatened by the structural framework that will get to adopt it. I also notice, if I may be very cynical, that logically, the first people you should be downsizing are people in administrative functions, not your core employees who do your core employees do the thing which is the reason why your business exists, okay? And then there are all these other, largely parasitic entities, the four horsemen of the bureaucratic apocalypse, compliance, HR, finance, procurement. Okay? They should be downsized first, okay? But they're the people who decide who gets downsized in many cases. So I'm not entirely comfortable that we won't end up effectively ending up with enormous bureaucracies where the core function of the business gets automated when it should be the other way around.
Yeah. And
I love that. I've never heard that. Four horsemen of the AI apocalypse. A new phrase there. And so to you, Matthew, similar question really. What can leaders do to bridge this trust gap?
So I think Rory hit on a real important concept here, right? And the concept is common interest versus self-interest. And often in culturally in organizations, we try to align our employees and our resources and everything we do to this concept around common interest. For common interest to exist, there has to be a high level of trust within the organization. Because if trust is eroded, I will step back from common interest into self-interest again. And so we struggle in organizations these days in order to find that common interest, because we are at a record low of trust in the world. You just have to, if you ask the Liberal Party in Australia at the moment, they have no idea. They're looking for what happened to their trust with their voters. If you go to the Democrat Party in the U.S., they're wondering what happened to their trust within their people. If you go to the Labour Party at the moment, or the Tory Party in the U.K., they've lost trust with their people, and these people are now moving into different blocks in order to find alternative solutions to the problems that the other people can't derive for them anymore. And so what's happened is in the trust area, what has happened is what Rory has described in the economic area, is that we have tried to become efficient by trying to be as like each other as possible. And because we've done that, we have traded away our competitive advantage, our uniqueness, our quirkiness, the thing that makes a difference, and the thing that actually wants people to be with us, away to try and be something that we are not. And so efficiency commoditizes my business, and I become a commodity, which means that I become a price taker in the end, not a price setter. And so therefore, the more I become efficient, the more my profit margin will erode, and the more I have to become efficient. And the cost of that is trust within the organization, because I may have to mislead or not be truthful, not be transparent with my people as I'm trying to become more efficient. And I'm not getting the best solutions because my people are not buying into the whole process. And because they've now switched to self-interest, which is in the end self-protection, which creates silos, which creates obfuscation, which creates blame, which creates all of those things that we today so commonly see within our organizations. And I see that as the real horseman of the apocalypse, right? As the lack of trust gallops through the organization and destroys everything that was built and everything that needs to be built in order for the organization to be successful.
So there's an interesting question, which is, if you use AI to optimize for efficiency, you'll end up becoming a price taker because you become more alike to your efficiency-seeking competitors.
Yes.
If you use it for a point of distinctiveness, or you use it to amplify your points of difference, my only problem is that doing the latter is usually more valuable than the former, but the gains are slower to appear.
And it's harder work as well, right? What we're talking about is not. It's easier just to cut than it is to build. And so if I'm chasing a short-term bonus, and I've got millions of dollars of my STI at risk as a CEO, do I secure my bonus by taking a short-term efficiency, or do I risk my bonus or forgo my bonus in order to create real sustainable value for the organization in the future? And that's where the big trust issues are starting to play out, because that logic is not escaped even on the doorman of hotels.
But by the way, one extra detail here. I think one way to earn trust is to show that you trust the other party.
Yes.
And so I think it's a two-way street, fundamentally. One very interesting large company which does something similar to that farmer's market principle I told you earlier. And it's always worth observing what they do, because Amazon, for all their faults, measure and test everything. And if you ring up Amazon and say, I ordered something and it didn't arrive, they just send you another one. Now, just be clear, they don't do that to everybody, because trust grows over time. If it's the first thing you've ever bought and you claim it didn't arrive, they treat you with a measure of suspicion. After you've bought 150 things and the 151st thing doesn't arrive, they give you the benefit of the doubt. Most organizations now, particularly because the internet, anything online, for example, has to be proof. It has a very large attack surface. Everything's calibrated to the lowest level of trust. So when you sign into a website, or if you try and open a bank account, you're subject to the same level of scrutiny and suspicion as if your surname was Escobar and they'd never heard of you. You try and open a business bank account with a bank you've had an account with for 25 years, and you're basically treated to the same level of suspicion as if you're a mysterious character in dark glasses who just wandered in off the street. And so part of the reason trust is being eroded is that businesses are going, oh no, our customers aren't trusting us. But they're not manifesting trust either in the opposite direction. They're not giving anybody the benefit of the doubt. Every single transaction is maximally optimized for what you might call, for effectively being proof against the most dishonest actor. And it's very interesting. There's a wonderful finding, by the way, in business, which was always regarded as being counterintuitive or a paradox, which is that customers who've had a problem with you, which you resolve satisfactorily, are more loyal subsequently than customers who didn't have the problem in the first place. But seen through the lens of trust, of course, that's completely rational, because your reserves of goodwill have now been tested and not found wanting. Everybody can be a fair weather friend. Everybody can be a great business when everything goes right. The businesses we actually devote our loyalty to and are accustomed to are those which will actually dig into their pockets occasionally when something goes wrong. And so it's worth noting that one of the things that's very rare is I've never had a brief which says, let's come up with 10 ways in which we can demonstrate that we trust our best customers.
Yes. Yep. And I've never seen a brief on how we can build strategies in order to trust our people more, or actually give them the trust.
Particularly when it comes to AI, right? Particularly with AI. I mean, how can leaders, how can the people in our audience today get their employees to trust them when their focus, when particularly the leaders' focus, is around their bonus and profitability? How can we make that change happen?
Well, I'll start this one off, Rory. It requires a courageous act, and it requires a courageous act of our leaders to actually put the common interest ahead of their own interest, and to actually state that I'm putting something at risk for our shared benefit. And that what I need back from you is your commitment to us, that you will reward this commitment I've given to you with extraordinary work and staying connected to the problem until we solve it. The issue we're facing in these days is that the problems we are facing these days are far more complex than they were beforehand. So therefore, we don't have the answers. And we used to be leaders where we knew everything, and so therefore we could tell everyone what to do. And we could be that sort of leader from the front. Whereas now we're leading people and we don't actually know the answers ourselves. We actually have no idea what's coming next. And so we have to lean into this uncertainty, to this discomfort. And I need you to trust me enough that you come on that journey into discomfort with me. And that you stay in that journey of discomfort until we actually find a breakthrough and a solution. Ultimately, we always do, right? And we always find that. And Rory, you know this from the creative process at your advertising agency, when you said, give us 2 weeks, and you come up with 78 dud ideas, but the unwavering belief is that we're facing into this complexity together, and the answer will come. And then all of a sudden, the breakthrough idea emerges. And then all of a sudden you can double down on that and you can move forward with that. And that is what leadership is required to do. And for that we need to put more at risk, or what I call take personal risk. And being public about the risk that I'm taking for us. Not just for me, not just for the organization, but for us.
One very interesting thing I learned about I work with a company called Gaping Void, who are cultural design people, and they said a very interesting discovery they made is that it is actually an extraordinary power play for a chief executive to say, I don't know how to solve this problem. I'm confident that between us we can. And actually you gain enormous stature through the honest admission of weakness. What's interesting is that most CEOs find that almost unbelievably painful to make as a statement, because they're still in the mold where you have to pretend to know everything and know exactly what you're doing. And so admissions of uncertainty need to proliferate.
Yes.
Quite dramatically,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And the issue here, very, very clear, the issue here is that I make a big assumption that you need certainty from me, when what you actually need from me is humility right now.
One analogy I'll use here, which I think works in Australia as well as the UK. I've never heard anybody get really, really angry about being done by an average speed camera. So we have, I imagine you have the same, you have fixed speed cameras, which are, if you go at 62 kilometers an hour past a 50 kilometer an hour speed camera, you are fined. That's it. Then you have average speed cameras, which leave you with the freedom to use discretionary judgment along the way. You could break the speed limit briefly to overtake a huge truck, for example, okay, provided you meet the overall wider criteria. But they leave room for discretionary judgment in a way that a fixed speed camera doesn't. I think what's happened is that because tech has allowed us to measure a lot of stupid little things, what we've done is we've imposed a lot of fixed speed cameras on business behavior rather than average speed cameras. And I think there's a great phrase, which, by the way, was meant as a criticism, not as an encouragement: what gets measured gets managed. And I think there's a problem that what gets micro-measured gets micromanaged. And actually allowing teams the autonomy. A guy who died recently, a Nobel Prize winner for economics, argued that the reason capitalism works is that as you go down an organization, there are all these people who have the autonomy to use ingenuity to solve the problem through their understanding of the specific context, which you don't have in a top-down control economy. And to some extent, our need to measure everything and to quantify everything and then to impose targets on small things is actually destroying that magical feature of free market capitalism.
Yeah, fantastic. And I mean, so it sounds very simple, right? Both Matthew and Roy, it sounds simple that to gain trust, leaders just need to be honest.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Helps a hell of a lot.
It helps a hell of a lot.
It yes?
But actually, many leaders are just staying silent. And that silence in itself is damaging trust. So what small things can leaders say and do to build this trust?
I'm sorry. I should have done better. I failed you. And I'm here
Wow.
to spend a bit of time with you, to listen to you and to learn from you, and for you to help me in order to solve this problem.
Wow.
So
I'd love to hear from the audience. In the Q&A coming up in about 5 minutes, I'd love to hear some feedback from the audience on whether they feel comfortable doing that, because it is a massive leap. But I think, I think, as you've both said, the pace of change is so crazy with AI. I don't think anybody can say anything different. But keeping silent scares people.
Well,
I think that's the problem.
the thing that I'm working on a paper with Stefano, who's in the audience right at the moment in the back there, right, and on AI amplifying your culture, and we believe that if you don't say it, AI will say it for you, right? So either your staff are going to hear it from you, or the staff are going to hear it through the AI that what is being done, and I think it is better for me politically if they hear it from me than rather through AI. Because AI is just going to amplify the fact that it's not working. And if I'm trying to protect a bad decision I made by putting a piece of tech into the thing that doesn't work, and I fire everybody who complains about it, and everybody has learned to live with this tech even though it doesn't work, and we just don't talk about it because Matthew gets really, really upset about it, AI is going to point that out very quickly that this is not working and needs to be changed. And who was the dummy that actually insisted on doing that? And why have you been running this for the last 3 years knowing it doesn't work?
Yeah.
There's also a self-aggrandizing narrative, which obviously appeals to managers, which is that most significant innovation starts at the top and is intentional. If you look at the history of science, most significant innovation emerges at the bottom Okay, and is an act of inspired observation by someone on the ground, which then translates upwards. And that's penicillin, that's Viagra, it's, I mean, the Wall's Viennetta ice cream. It was not, no one had the idea of producing scrolling ice cream. It was actually a faulty extruding machine which produced the effect by accident. And someone noticed that it looked really cool. And actually, you need your corporate AI strategy to be just as receptive. This was why I think outsourcing manufacturing to China was such a catastrophe, because it meant that all the innovations that happened in the act of making and doing got stuck overseas. They never made their way back to you. And because there's this lovely narrative that we design the product, someone else makes them, that reverse process, which is effectively happenstance discoveries actually translating upwards. A very large amount of your innovation might be driven by your suppliers, for example. And the fact that the narrative of top-down command and control doesn't like that story often means that it closes itself off to it. And in science, it's considered to be 90% of significant discoveries happen backwards.
Yeah, but you know, Rory, that control is just an illusionary concept we tell ourselves so that we don't have to suck our thumbs and rock ourselves to sleep at night, right? And we know that control doesn't actually exist, right? We think it exists, we want it to exist, we want to be in control of something, but we actually never are, right?
I think a great Sir Martin Sorrell quote, which was, a lot of value is destroyed in the pursuit of organizational neatness.
Yes.
Yeah, scary. And AI is the ultimate in organizational neatness. So does that mean it's going to destroy value?
Not necessarily, actually. It depends how you use it.
Yeah.
Genuinely. It can be, if you use it badly, what you're doing is optimizing for average. It's also worth noting that all data sets come from the past, not from the future. So it will need humans to effectively de-bias it, actually. And also de-bias it against being ludicrously deferential. Wonderful idea, Rory. I see you spotted. And actually, I need to train it just as much to actually go, you haven't thought about the opposite problem.
And I think that's a really good point, because there are 4 things we need to become better at. If we become better at these, then AI becomes a fascinating, productive tool that allows us to do so much more than we've ever have done before. And that the first one is context. We need to be able to understand the context in which we operate, in which society operates. We need to understand the circumstance. In what circumstance do we wish to act at this moment in order to make a difference? And then it's social logic, about what is the actual logic that it is the logic of our society and our cultures that actually dictate the way that we move. And then we can use that to unleash creativity. We've been training, and I come from a university, and this is my fault, right? I admit, I'm sorry, right? We've been training your children, and we've been developing your children to become more machine-like, and to follow process, and to be job ready. And we don't teach them how to think anymore. We don't teach them how to dream anymore. We don't teach them how to engage in philosophy and imagine that none of us are real and we're only the figment of each other's imaginations. And we don't go through those exercises in order to be able to understand what does humanity mean to us, and what is context and circumstance that I need to act in. Often when I ask people to say, why are you doing this process, and so what is the context in which this process actually helps us do our work, people can't answer that. They said, I don't know, I guess it could be this, but we've never spoken about that. We spoke about the technical aspect of the 7-step process, not the philosophical aspect of why we have this process. And so I'm advising school leavers at the moment to not just take a gap year, but to take 2 gap years, right? Travel the world, work as a barista, have fun. And then in 2 years, we might actually know what will be needed and what will be gone.
Great
We'll
advice.
have twice as many Australians in London then.
Yeah, absolutely. and you'll finally get a good coffee over there.
Touche.
Fantastic. I think we're going to go to Q&A in a few minutes, but just one final question, really, just to say, in 2 years' time, Matthew, when those people come out of their 2-year gap year, what do you think the successful AI leaders will look like?
They will understand that the concept of being is more important than the concept of doing, because we define ourselves by doing. We like to be busy, and I look around the room, and most people don't work a 37.5-hour week in this room. Am I correct in that assumption? Right? You're working more hours, and so therefore you're working harder rather than smarter. And we define our quality by an outdated concept of time and salary, when really what the future for us holds is saying, how can I generate twice as much value in half the amount of time, and actually go sailing and or play some golf or pickleball, right? Whatever that might look like, and whatever that could be. And would we celebrate those people just as well as we celebrate those people who do 60 hours a week? We need to let go of that paradigm of working harder. We need to release ourselves from the assumptions that we are not the sharpest tools in the shed, and that we're not as good as the others, because we are as good. And we can come up with a breakthrough, and we can come up with great ideas. And we just have to know that people believe in us, help us to come up with those ideas. And what Rory said is to enable the base to come up with those ideas, because they already have 10 of those ideas. They just don't have the courage to speak about them, because nobody will listen to them. Or if they do, they will get shut down, because it's not their job to do that.
Fantastic. Rory, just a final comment from yourself?
I suppose, yes. I mean, I am optimistic in terms of if we frame this from the point of view of possibility, rather than from the point of view of efficiency. There are two basic modes in which you can look at a business, and actually they come in a way, they're influenced by, unconsciously, by two schools of economics. There's the Austrian school, which believes value is subjective and sees business as a discovery mechanism. The point of a business is to continually explore new forms of value creation. Unfortunately, we've been subject, and most business schools are subject to kind of the Chicago school, which says that value is created in the factory, not in the mind, and that the job of a business is to give people what they want at a lower cost than they had it last year through gains to scale rather than gains to discovery. Now, you know, all that efficiency stuff, I'm not discounting it. It has a value, but it's not where the real value creation comes from. And so I am worried that AI, it will be dangerous in two hands, the hands of terrorists and the hands of chief financial officers.
Yeah, and I hesitate to say on that bombshell. That's a great way to end, I think. Starting off with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Thank you, David.
And ending up with that. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Rory, and thank you very much, Matthew, for a fantastic session, a fantastic conversation. Loads of stuff. I've learned new stuff, and I hope the audience there has as well.
I think so. Amazing experience. I think just for a Friday night to sit here and listen to you two guys, it's fascinating. Food for thought everywhere. I think there's probably some questions in the audience which we should probably go to. I just want to make a quick plug, actually, because you've got Rory here. If you've got any questions to ask Rory, the guy's amazing, obviously, with his mind. But if you want to see him live in person, he's going to be in Melbourne. It's a very private dinner, and I'm not sure if there's any spots left available, but I know a few people that are going, and he's solving problems over dinner. So if you're fascinated by what Rory talks about and you want to go and sit with him in public live, I think it's 30 people only, Rory, is that right?
I think so, yeah. We could probably squeeze in another couple of chairs.
But just if you're interested, let me know, and I'll connect you with all of that. And do we have a mic for any questions? Is there anybody that's got any questions in the room or online maybe? Oh, we can grab a quick mic. Oh, I think we've got one. Oh. Maybe good to announce who you are, Lavinia. Maybe good to say my name's Lavinia, so we know who you are.
Wait.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And first, thank you. It's absolutely...
Nope.
That was human help, not AI help, but very much appreciated. And the conversation, brilliant. Absolutely timely. At my company, the company I work for, we had a Claude Day today, so specifically for go and experiment, and it's fascinating, also scary. Now, I would like to touch upon, two questions. First, Rory, can I get a seat at that dinner for, not for me, for my CFO? And secondly, you both touched on the potential plays of AI, be it either efficiency or increased value. Now, I wonder if it's an or actually do we need an and? Because the genie is out of the bottle. Yes. We like it or not, certain things will disappear or will be replaced by AI. And there are services that are, let's say, compliance-driven, that people would go and just opt for the cheapest service that exists. And I find, as a company, do we actually have a choice of not pursuing that efficiency pathway, where knowing if we don't, our competitors will. So give it a year or two, we'll be out of business.
I do have a quote from Jules Goddard, who's a professor at London Business School, who once said that strategy is the art of staying one step ahead of the need to be efficient.
Yes.
Which I think is probably fair. That actually, there will always be, by the way, there are businesses whose strategy is complete cost leadership. And if you have some structural advantage in that area or you have a scale advantage, I completely understand it. It's also absolutely necessary to get the balance right between what is technically called explore and exploit. But I would argue that human activity, if exploit becomes more efficient, you may have heard me talk about this before, bee behaviour. A certain percentage of bees don't follow the waggle dance because you need bees to actually harvest the sources of value and nectar and pollen that you know about, but they allow 10 to 20% of bees to wander off at random, finding out what's different and what don't we know about. And that's known, by the way, that same inverted commas trade-off, I don't think it is a trade-off, I think they're two complementary parts of a system. But that same thing appears not only in animal foraging behaviour, but also in algorithm design, for example. You have this trade-off between to what extent do we rely on what we know and to what extent do we try and discover what we don't. I would hope that human activity gets up-weighted towards explore slightly and automation gets up-weighted towards exploit. That would seem to be a sensible division of labour in terms of, effectively, we have this kind of new world in which you have two kinds of minds, and this is based on Adam Smith. Each one should do what they're best suited to do, what they're uniquely good at. And I would argue that, what isn't yet known and dealing with, wider philosophical questions is still a human strength. Execution might well be very much a silicon strength, not a carbon strength. Yeah. So getting the balance right is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Can I just add my perspective? Strategy is important, and having a strategic goal to avoid becoming a commodity is vital. But culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if your culture cannot deal with either becoming more efficient or becoming more effective or becoming more living in possibility, then all of your strategies are going to be wasted anyway. The question I ask is I've tried all AI engines, right? All of those, and if you hear from a specific one, I've used all of them. They seem to be all very similar to me. And so therefore, if you're a Claude or a ChatGPT or an X or a Grok or any of those other things like that, we're all going to end up in the same place. So therefore, there's no advantage. And so the only thing that you have is that you have this moment of advantage because you went first. And so therefore you have 6 months before everybody else is caught up, where you've made more profits than anybody else has, and now you're back in the same situation. And the question is, what are you going to do then? How are you going to cut costs even further, right? And how are you going to be able to get, you know, Claude to reduce their tokens by 75% so that you can become even more efficient?
No, the question is rather, can you afford not to?
Yes, I think the question is, can I afford not to? And the answer is you cannot. If you buy into the efficiency argument, your organization is lost in the long run. If you buy into the we're going to use this efficiency in order to drive new ideas and new concepts forward, you have a chance of taking an extraordinary chunk of the market. The one thing we cannot forget is that in 2062, the world population will be for the first time negative growth, which means that the thing we have relied on as lazy capitalists is population growth. And in 2062, population growth is going backwards, which means that every year after that, there'll be less humans who can buy our products, drive our Maseratis, fly with our airlines, and buy Rolex watches. And so if that happens, the only way you can actually stay in competition is by being better than the others, not by being the same as the others.
By the way, the survival of the Swiss watch industry should provide a source of optimism for all of us. But
yes.
Most people who have a £10,000 Rolex set it by looking at their mobile phone. or by looking at a £20 Seiko quartz.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think organizations have no choice but to innovate.
Daminda.
Yeah.
Hi, Rory and Matthew. Thank you. It's a great presentation. I got two questions, one for Matthew, one for Rory. So Matthew, you talked about the human, the being, right? So we've been teaching leadership skills from business schools, courses. So are you saying that everything we learn need to unlearn and learn something new to restructure the whole leadership thing, and what we're going to learn just being in the centralized point? Does that mean then obviously the whole leadership learning capabilities need to revamp and shift and pivot?
Yep. I'll answer that first. So I apologize for having been a bad leadership person for the last 20 years, because most of the stuff I taught is no longer relevant anymore. What I have learned is that the essence of good leadership today, and what we need to do, is to mobilize others into action towards a common goal. And so therefore, when we mobilize others towards a common goal, our active leadership is over, and we step back and we allow others to lead. And so how do I help people, how do I mobilize people into action? And the only way you really do that is by developing trust. And so when we are in a situation where we are in a low trust environment, it's really, really hard to mobilize people into action. The other concept that a leader really needs to understand is that momentum is everything. and being right or wrong means absolutely nothing. And as long as I have momentum, and it might not be going right in the right direction, I can make those adjustments, I can fix that path. But if I stop because it's not perfect and I don't know the path, and I demobilize the organization, I create greater damage with that. And so as leaders, we're not trying to become technical experts or understanding what are the 7 principles of leadership anymore. What we're trying to understand is, how do I mobilize you into action? And how do I then make sure that the momentum that we have created does not get eroded? In the past, we've used leadership in order to execute strategy. And we have neglected culture because culture was just too hard for us to fix. And so we dealt with bad culture because we got the outcomes, we got the strategy, we made the money, we got the outcomes. Now we're no longer in that position where we can just lead strategy alone. We have to lead culture. And one of the things we've never done as leaders is being able to lead culture before. And so leading culture is slightly different than leading strategy. And I've got a couple of people here who've been on the general manager program that I run, where we really focus on how to lead culture rather than strategy. Strategy is still important, don't get me wrong. You have to have the vision, you have to have aspiration. But how we lead that is fundamentally changed.
I think, on the other hand, it's a much, much healthier way to optimize for society, optimize for variance rather than optimizing for a single metric. You know, if you think about it, a good car is not optimized around a single, acceleration, fuel economy, whatever it may be. And actually that it's very strange, but I think that's one of the most interesting books, because you realize there's this assumption about equality. I mean, we've suddenly got to ask tough questions post-COVID, which is, who's better off, someone in London earning £200,000 a year, or someone who's next to a beach in in Tenerife who earns 50. And I think one of the things I hope is that we become just a bit more philosophical about this stuff and less obsessed with quantification. But as I said, that doesn't absolve us from a moral imperative to look after the vulnerable or people who are genuinely suffering. But there are lots and lots of different ways to be happy and successful, I would argue.
David, Rory, we're bang on time. That is absolutely amazing. I think we've got one more question.
Yes.
Beg your pardon. So sorry, Mercia.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if this works. It does.
Are you okay for time, David and Rory? Just for one more minute. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carl, for organizing this. I think the only way this conversation could have been better is if Seth Godin was part of this conversation. I really enjoyed the fact that technology wasn't mentioned in the conversation of AI. But in terms of Matthew saying, thank you for the apology, what you've taught people and how to become leaders and follow rules. That's why I learned from Seth Godin that our current school system has been developed around the Industrial Revolution, where people were taught to follow rules. They leave school and they follow rules, therefore they don't think creatively. And I still see that. In terms of encouraging people to use AI creatively, where they build things from bottom up rather than from top down, where things were created, like Coca-Cola was created by a pharmacist, fun fact. How do we keep the momentum going with encouraging people to use AI without everyone sounding the same? So, for example, I work in cybersecurity, and I'm trying to outsource or delegate things to various people in the business to help me out, while at the same time trying to teach them about cybersecurity and the importance, including AI governance. This is being recorded. Okay. How do I make sure that they don't just go into Claude or ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever, input a very simple prompt to get out AI training, for example? How do we make sure that we encourage everyone and empower everyone to experiment, but ensure that they don't just rely on what AI puts out or what the outcome is?
I've got a perfect one-sentence answer to that, which actually plays into Seth Godin's point. At school, you're taught there's a single right answer. There isn't. Actually, in real life, you're not necessarily trying to be right. You're trying to be less wrong than your competitors. But the other thing you're taught in school, which I think is fatal, is that it's cheating to change the question. Now, obviously, a school examining system couldn't really work if someone said, I decided I didn't want to write about the English Civil War, so I decided to write about Greek city-states instead. Okay, that wouldn't work. However, in business, nearly everybody who's had a breakthrough in business, I don't just mean Steve Jobs or Elon, I mean literally, call center staff who have an interesting idea that improves their call center experience. Generally, it happens not by coming up with a better answer to the same question as everybody else, but by rewriting the question.
How do you encourage?
My argument is that everybody in Silicon Valley was asking, what can a computer do? And Steve Jobs asked, how does it feel while you're doing it?
How do you encourage everyone to actually rewrite their questions or change their mind? Or that's the issue that I'm seeing, because even if you go onto LinkedIn, everyone sounds the same because everyone's inputting things and everyone's AI is talking to AI. So, I mean, this conversation has been brilliant, but not everyone thinks like everyone else does in this room.
If you go to Caddy.com/translate, there is a translation engine that translates what you say into LinkedIn language. And it translates, I've just been sentenced to jail for 2 years for fraud, into, I see this as a beginning of an exciting new opportunity. Okay. No, you're absolutely right about this, and I think that's something that prizing curiosity and prizing what I think is, the greatest human gift in many ways is reframing things, not necessarily changing things, but getting people to look at the same thing in a different way. I think that becomes more and more important, and what we'll need, I think, is different, and I think more, how should I say, I think we'll need more localized and actually more local autonomy within businesses in order to really get the value from that. Because if you have simple top-down linear process, what you tend to do is you get to the same place as everybody else. It's very easy once you've got to the top of the mountain to see what the best route up is, but generally the best way to do it is to teleport yourself to the top of the mountain through imagination and then look downwards. And so I think by the way, there's a whole debate about this, which is, do we actually need people with STEM degrees to the extent we thought? Do we actually need people with philosophy degrees? And the most peculiar things happened in Ogilvy, which is the most extraordinary practitioner in AI was a guy we hired who was rejected by the major consulting firms, David, because he didn't have an engineering degree, basically. He had a first in philosophy and theology from Oxford. And it strikes me that he's the guy, actually, with the educational background we really want. That the humanities may actually enjoy a bit of a resurgence.
Yeah.
So I will try to answer one sentence. And instead of telling them to keep the company safe, ask them for their help to keep the company safe.
Company safe. Perfect.
Yeah.
So,
Rory, David, absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you very much for spending your morning in the heat in London in no air conditioning with us. David, I wish you a pleasant journey back to the air conditioning in Dubai, and I'll see you there in a couple of weeks. But Rory, absolutely thank you so much for spending some time with us. I can't thank you enough for all you do for us and your inspiration and your words and your wisdom. And I think the whole room here thinks this probably the same. So thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone. And on that note, it's Poets' Day here. It's piss off early tomorrow, Saturday. Beer's out there, so we're heading out. We're heading out there. So, David, thanks very much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Well done, mate.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Drinks and stuff outside, food. It's Friday. You haven't got to go anywhere tomorrow.